Well, here it is, a week later, after Zuna went back to L.A. And I think I'd kind of like to correct some of the things she said. One thing about Zuna, when she's on camera, she always says things that are very nice about everything. Okay? The trip we had to the Berkshires from Lansing was not a really, really fun trip. In fact, it was cold, wet, and rainy. And it started off on the wrong foot. Zuna's flight was supposed to come in to Lansing at about 6:45. And she said she went, and I said I would, and I told her to call me from Chicago to make sure that she'd made the flight. She didn't call. And so I called United to find out what time the flight was scheduled to come in, and they said about 7:20, so it was about almost 35 minutes late. And so I waited until about 20 to 7 to drive out the airport, and that was 5 miles away from the airport. I saw her flight go over, and I knew that she was arriving actually on time. By the time I got to the airport, she was in the baggage area, and a little bit upset that I wasn't there to meet her when she came down the escalator. We had dinner that night, a great dinner, at a very nice restaurant. It was a little noisy. There were a bunch of women at one table. It was sort of ladies' night out, and they were having a lot of fun and laughing a lot and making a lot of noise, so it was a little bit disturbing. And then we came home to my house, and Zuna went to her apartment, which we have an apartment, and she went to bed very early, and I went to bed very early. And we got up the next morning very early because I had planned to fly her up to Mackinac Island for the day. It would have been a great flight. There was only one problem. It was very, very, very foggy out and raining, so it didn't look like a good day to fly to Mackinac. The weather wouldn't have bothered us because I'm IFR rated, except there is no instrument approaching to Mackinac. It was raining up there too, so we were left in Lansing, East Lansing. So we were left in East Lansing, stuck here for a day. At about noon, the weather let up a little bit, and I took Zuna to show her the Michigan State campus. And it's a very beautiful campus in a lot of ways. 47,000 acres for 47,000 students, so each student has an acre of its own to sort of wander around on. That night, I'd asked to take Zuna out to dinner, but it was too cold, and she decided to cook dinner for me. Now, when I was out in Los Angeles last March, she said that was the last time she'd ever cook a dinner for me again. But she cooked that night, and it was a good dinner, and we sort of relaxed, went to bed early. But there was another problem. We had planned to leave on Wednesday, but I bought a new car, and it wasn't ready on Tuesday. And so we had to wait till late Wednesday afternoon to get the new car, so we couldn't leave until Thursday, the 1st of October, which was quite a delay. Actually, when we got up on Thursday morning, it was bright and clear and warming up a little. We left at 7 o'clock to drive across Michigan and Canada to Niagara Falls, which Zuna had never seen before and was looking forward to see. It was a good trip, an easy trip. We arrived at Niagara Falls at about 12:15, so it was only about a 5-hour trip, which isn't too bad. The only problem was we caught up to the bad weather that was in Lansing the day before, and it was cloudy, misting, a terrible day, cold, windy, and full of tourists. We went to the Canadian Falls and the Canadian side, which has turned into a big tourist trap over the last 25 years. But we did take some pictures. Zuna climbed up on a wall above the falls. I was afraid she'd fall over the cliff, but she didn't, which was good. Then we had lunch in Niagara Falls. Didn't have a window view, which wasn't the greatest view, but the lunch was okay. And then we left for the Five Finger Lakes area where we planned to spend the evening and the night at an inn on one of the lakes. After we got on New York Thruway, we were almost to Rochester when one of the great highlights of the trip happened. I was passing the line of semi-trailer trucks in line of traffic at 65 miles an hour, and out of my right-hand mirror I saw a police car pull into the right lane right behind the semi I was passing, and then it pulled in behind me, cutting off a driver that was tailgating me. And in Michigan, when a police car or an emergency vehicle pulls in behind you, you're supposed to get out of the way as quick as you can and let them pass. So as soon as I was past the truck, I turned in to the right lane, and the police vehicle followed me and turned on his flashers, and I had to pull over to the side of the road and wait for the officer to come and tell me what I'd done wrong. When she approached the car, the first thing I said was, "What do you got against Michigan drivers?" which she didn't really appreciate. And she told me I hadn't used my turn signals when I pulled into the right lane in front of the truck, and so she was going to give me a ticket. She asked me on my driver's license and the registration, and it was a brand new car, and we had a bunch of papers that were temporary vehicle registrations, and I was going through the papers, and she said, "Never mind the vehicle registration, just give me your driver's license." So I gave her my driver's license, and she went back to the police car and sat there for 20 minutes making out the ticket. When she came back to the window, and I had been waving the registration out the window to her, but she didn't pay any attention to that. When she got back to the window, she said, "Okay, I'm giving you a citation for not using your turn signals when you turn to the right lane." And I said, "Oh, wait a minute, you were tailgating me." And she said, "I was not tailgating you. I was one car length behind you." And I said, "Well, where I come from, when you're one car length behind another car at 65 miles an hour, that's tailgating." She didn't appreciate that. She didn't laugh or anything else. She just handed me the ticket. And Zuna and I had a good laugh because we thought it was a funny situation, and especially Zuna did. That night we had a nice dinner, and we talked about the ticket and laughed about it some more. We finished dinner at about 8:15, and Zuna said goodnight and went back to her room, and I went to my room. The next morning I woke up at 6, got a luggage cart, went into my room, packed my suitcases up, put them on the luggage cart, and went back out in the hall, and some guy was coming down the hall with his shoes in his hand, trying to be very quiet, and when he took one look at me, he turned and ran out the other exit. I don't know where the guy was doing or what he was doing, but he didn't appreciate seeing me. Anyway, I put my luggage in the car, and then called Zuna on the phone and asked her if she was up, and she said she was just getting up, and I could come and get her luggage when it was ready, and she called me in about 5 minutes, and I got her luggage, put her luggage in the car. I had breakfast in the meantime, but she doesn't eat breakfast very much, so we thought we could stop at the first rest stop. So we thought we could stop at the first rest stop on the thruway, which we did, and she had a cup of coffee and I think a rolled bagel or something. And then we drove on, and we arrived in Great Barrington in Massachusetts in the Berkshires at about 12:15 or 12:30 in the afternoon. We had lunch. The lunch was okay, but there was a man really berating his daughter, who was in a wheelchair, about he didn't want to spend much money sending her to college, which kind of upset our lunch a little bit. And then we drove the last 15 miles to New Marlborough to the Old Inn, where we were going to spend the next 2 days. The Old Inn was really an old inn. The building we stayed in was built in 1760 during the French-Indian War, okay? And it looked like it had been built in 1760. Zuna had a nice room on the second floor with a fireplace, a jacuzzi, a bathtub, a television, and everything else. I had a room on the first floor that was as bare as a room could get. No television, no bathtub, just a shower, basically, and a toilet. And it was very, very cold in my room. There was no heat, although there was heat upstairs in Zuna's room. That night, evening, Molly and Richard drove up to have dinner with us from New York. And we had dinner in the main inn, which was older than the old inn that we were staying in. And there were no electric lights, so it was a candlelight, had to be a candlelight dinner. The food was very, very good. We enjoyed the dinner. Richard and Molly went back home and had invited us to have Molly and Richard left, and we were going to see them the next day, which was going to be a lot of fun, we thought. But when we got up in the next morning, it was still very, very foggy and very, very rainy, and not the kind of day that you'd really want to go out and have a great time or see the fall colors in the mountains, because it was so foggy. The fog was right on the ground, and you practically couldn't see anything. But we did do a little shopping in Great Barrington, and then Molly took us to one of the great, great areas near Stockport, I think it was. It's a really great estate that's been donated to the state by a composer and his wife, and it's one of the most beautiful layouts you ever saw. I mean, as far as gardens and trees, and it was pouring rain when we were there, and we walked around up and down the hills and saw just about everything there was to see. And when we got back down, Catherine, who was the wife of the composer, saw us and said, "I will show you around his office in the barn." And so she opened it up and she talked to us for over half an hour. Very, very interesting talk. Very, very interesting person. She's 87 years old, and you would never guess it, not in a million years. Right? So that was a good part of the trip, but it was very wet and very rainy, which wasn't a lot of fun. That night, that evening, we had dinner at Molly and Richard's new weekend retreat that they built, spent a year building. And it was very nice, very pleasant, very good dinner. It was the anniversary of their wedding dinner, and it was very good. We had a rack of ribs, which Richard fixed, and Molly did a lot of the other stuff. But we enjoyed it, and we had a good talk and some good wine that Zuna bought for them, and it was a very, very pleasant evening, but still cold, wet, and rainy outside. We went back to the old inn at about 11 o'clock. Zuna went upstairs to her room, and I went into my room, freezing to death. I didn't sleep very well that night. I got up at 6 o'clock, looked out the window. It was just getting light, and it was still very, very foggy. The fog was on the ground, raining again, and very, very cold. And so I got on the internet. That's one thing I had. I didn't have a television or radio in the room, but I did have Wi-Fi. So I got on the internet, and I thought, I knew that Zuna was not very happy. We were going to have brunch with Molly and Richard that morning, and I thought if the weather stayed the way it was, I could get our reservations back to Los Angeles from New York later on that afternoon. As an alternative, I also said if we wanted to drive back to East Lansing and she wanted to get a nonstop flight to California, I could drop her off at Toronto, because the Toronto airport was only like 20 miles out of our way. She said, "Wait, and we'll see." We went to Molly's and Richard's for the brunch at about 10 o'clock, and suddenly the sun came out. It was bright and cheerful, a wonderful, wonderful day. We had a great brunch with them, and then we went for about a 3-hour walk through the hills, by waterfalls, the fall colors. We could see them for the first time, and it was a beautiful day. At 2 o'clock, Molly and Richard had to go back to New York because he had a presentation to make the following Monday, and it was Sunday afternoon. And Zuna and I decided that it was time for us to leave too, so we had checked out of the hotel, the old inn, and started our drive back to Michigan. We'd only gone about 15 miles. We ran into rain and fog and bad weather again, and stayed that evening in the Finger Lakes region again, and then left the next morning in fog, wind, rain, and cold, and drove all the way to Lansing. And we got into East Lansing at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. We had a nice lunch and laughed about the trip. Zuna had changed her reservation from Tuesday night at a 7:30 flight to a Monday night at a 7:30 flight, so I took her to the airport at about 6:30, and she caught her flight. When she got back to California, the entire trip from the time we left the Finger Lakes that morning until the time she got home at 11:30 LA time that night, it was a 22-hour trip. And I used to tease her about the fact that she'd spend 22 hours in an airplane but I think the car ride and the weather we had just wasn't the best weather for a trip in the Berkshires. Anyway, now you can sit back and you can relax and you can look and see and judge for yourself what the trip was really like.